Hey everybody, I'm Vince White. I'm an employment attorney, and on this channel, usually, we answer publicly posted questions from YouTube users. But today, we're not doing that. I have a co-host.
Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Ari or Ariella Steinhorn. I'm a writer, sometimes publicist. I have a Substack newsletter where I write about workers' issues, power, powerful people, labor, things that are sexy in the culture. And I've known Vince for a number of years now. We've partnered on a bunch of projects. So excited to talk about current events.
Very true. Ari is the best publicist I ever worked with, and I love the phrase that you taught me, the story midwife. I think that is a tremendously useful phrase in our industry because there is so much knowledge and so much subtle caring required in this industry to bring a story to fruition. Your approach is fantastic. So I'm always excited to have you on. You've got the
Thank
news for us this week.
Yeah, I every week I think that something will slow down, but it never does. Um, okay, let's start with um, let's start with the CNN story about how DOGE is firing low performers from the government. I'm curious, Vince. I mean, there have been so many journalists coming to me wondering if I know federal workers who have been fired for political reasons or laid off, or what's going on at the VA, what's going on at the IRS. I mean, it just seems like pandemonium, like with the federal workers. Um, I'm wondering if you've heard from a lot of people with potential claims.
I have. So I've had an interesting set of conversations with agencies I don't usually deal with, the CIA and the FBI. Um, and so you said specifically politically motivated. The
Mhm.
CIA especially feels that they're being targeted. I don't know if you remember the Russiagate thing and the Hunter Biden laptop. There was two situations where members of the CIA came out with these letters, like 30, I don't know, intelligence agents all pen
Yeah.
a letter together. Yeah. So listen, we now know Russiagate was like propaganda entirely. And they, it turns out, also knew that at the time they did it, which is super weird because they're not supposed to mess in domestic affairs, right? But
Yeah.
they're they're highlighting that as why the CIA is being cleaned out, and so that's very political, and they're very up in arms about it. But it's
Mhm.
strange because listen, I'm no fan of the current administration, but I mean, you're not supposed to make up lies to change regimes in your own country. Regime
Yes.
change is something we usually reserve for other countries, so
Yeah.
it's kind of a weird situation. We're getting those calls right now, and it's like, but you did a bad thing. I don't, I don't know what to do.
Right. Totally. No, it's interesting. I spoke to this woman a couple of weeks ago. Her name is Amy Nelson, and her Amazon went after her husband for allegedly violating his employment contract. So they went after him on like a criminal level. It's a long story, but she this was under the Biden DOJ.
Oh,
And she was like, the Amazon DOJ FBI like connection under the Biden administration was so tight.
yeah,
And like we think that there wasn't, I think sometimes Democrats or left wing people like to think like there's no corruption with us, but like there can be. Um,
yeah.
like she was like, it's basically just a revolving door of like prosecutors at the DOJ potentially wanting to join like white shoe law firms after they leave the government and wanting to throw Amazon a bone should Amazon be a client. So they basically pressured FBI agents showed up at her front door, raided their house. They have four daughters.
Oh,
And this is kind of related. It's like not totally related to what we were talking about, but it just like reminded me of what you just said. They pressured the DOJ was pressuring her husband to plead guilty. He didn't. And then they dropped the investigation because he just wouldn't plead guilty. They wanted to make an example of him, I think, with Amazon. But she actually is like, she said the same thing. I don't, I don't love this administration at all. Like they're horrifying, but there's also a lot of like corruption that needs to be rooted out of the government. Um, so I do think like what Trump and DOGE are doing, not great, but also it plays into this idea that like they kind of are taking the narrative arc of like we're now rooting out the corruption that everyone suspected was there, even though they themselves are also corrupt.
Yeah. I mean, that's the problem, right? Like,
Yeah.
if anyone else could have done it, that would have been amazing. We're in a worst case scenario in some ways, but the narrative sticks, right? Like, there's really no question the Biden administration was engaging in political prosecution. Like, it
Yeah.
was a China esque China starter. It was like a little bit like how China operates in terms of, hey, you're not doing what we want, so we are now
Right.
going to start applying the laws to you, type of situation. And
Totally.
it's scary. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. There's a lot of people in the federal government with very good claims right now. I just don't
Yeah.
think that the CIA and FBI agents are generally going to be in that category because a lot of them did some bad things over the past
Yeah.
couple of years.
Yeah. The things that scare me, like the firings from like a human consumer level, are like the FAA and
Yeah.
people who are trying to ward off hackers. It's like that doesn't make sense to me that we would be gutting. I'm working with someone now who he was the information security lead for VA.gov,
Yeah.
and he spoke out publicly about DOGE on some sort of government forum. Like super high performer, MIT grad, super smart guy, basically managed VA.gov so that veterans could access their medical benefits, and then also was like preserving the data of like therapy sessions with veterans. So like that stuff is important because you don't want veterans getting blackmailed or even some of the stuff veterans tell people and their therapists in private therapy sessions. Like you don't want people getting access to that. So he posted about DOGE, was fired a couple of days later, the only engineer who was fired. So that's like suspicious to me in terms of politically motivated, because he's like trying to protect veterans.
Yeah. And I'm a huge fan of that. I employ plenty of veterans. Um, I saw that interview. Where is that hosted? I would love to link that down below because I think the viewers might want to see that
It's
interview.
about to be out in Wired in like 30 minutes.
So what was I watching? Like was I watching clips?
So he was on NBC Nightly News, and then I also made a TikTok about it that's gone pretty viral, and people are
I'm
like,
not.
"What the, like, what
This
the
is
hell?"
fascinating. I
Yeah.
watched a video of you talking with this man, and I'm not on TikTok. Where where did I see it?
Oh, um, I was not. So I was talking. Are you sure it was this guy and not another guy?
I mean,
Because I've talked to a bunch
you're
of
you're busy then. I don't know.
people. My
That's
schedule.
fascinating. I think it might have been on LinkedIn.
Oh, yes. Okay, sorry. So it was a video of him that he posted on his LinkedIn. I will share that with you. But
Understood. Okay.
there's a bunch of interviews coming out, like deeper dive interviews, today.
Amazing. So if you can, I'd love to link those down below.
Yeah,
Also, is your LinkedIn public facing? Can we link your LinkedIn here?
it is. Yeah, for
Okay.
sure.
I'm not usually on LinkedIn, but I'm currently terrorizing somebody who is a serial sexual assaulter, and I'm having uh, I'm having 10 employment attorneys per day view his profile, and
Oh, wow,
he can see them view his profile, and apparently it's freaking him out more and more.
that's
We hear
amazing.
from a spy and informer in the organization. It's very fun. It's little things in life. Um, okay, so that's that story. What's next?
Um, let's talk about. So there are a couple of like interesting local stories. I feel like we've talked about federal stuff for a while, and um, everybody is either too aware of what's going on in DC or like purposefully trying to live under a rock. Um,
Yes.
so there's a story out in San Francisco that apparently Democratic leaders are trying to hold politicians accountable for sexual harassment in San Francisco. I don't know exactly. They said that no one is reporting. Literally, no one is reporting. It's not underreporting. So they have some sort of new code of conduct for political leaders and up and coming candidates. Um, so who knows if it will work? But I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, if I don't know if code of conducts work in like
Yeah.
deterring. I guess like maybe they can help people feel more comfortable to speak out, but who knows?
So that's industry wide. I think it's just now after Me Too, we got the report rate up to 4% of victims is
Mm,
the best data on that. But I agree with you. Code of conduct. I mean, we all know what sexual harassment is. We know it when we see it. Like I knew it when I was 16 and I was at my, I was going to say my first job, but by 16, it was probably my third or fourth. And I saw it happen. I was like, oh, and I was 16-year-old boy in the middle of rural America. Like I was like, not good. This is not good. It's intuitive. You know what it is. Like, I don't know that the code of conduct changes anything.
I know. I feel the same sometimes about like trainings. I'm like, okay, if
Yeah.
someone takes like the trainings are so silly. Like I know they're the intentions are good, but like it's like they're so almost cartoonish. I had to take a sexual harassment training because I was a manager in the state of California in 2018. And by that point, I had been sexually harassed so many times in my career. I was like, this is comical that I'm taking the sexual harassment training because it was mandated. And
Yeah.
the training was, um, it was, I forget, it was like a man, like someone sees like a man like touching someone else on the shoulder and like what should she do? And I don't know. I know that the intentions are good. Um, but people are not going to report so long as retaliation exists. I feel like you could have a code of conduct, but if like one manager retaliates and the person loses their job in San Francisco politics and like their dream is of working in San Francisco politics, they're just not going to report.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't want to blow smoke here, but I've always thought that the path to increasing the report rate is actually through your work, the story midwifery. Like,
Yeah.
and I've said this for almost a decade now. Like, what I do is whack-a-mole. Like, we're running around hurting people, scaring people, getting checks for our clients. It doesn't change anything. It changes two bank accounts, the companies and my clients. That's
Mhm.
it. Three, I guess mine too. But
Yeah.
yeah, let's not forget me. But very important. No, but what you do, getting those stories out there and letting people see the wins, like
Right.
the people who stood and fought and succeeded, that I think I've always thought is something you did with Simone and then with Lioness, and you're still doing it today. And that makes a bigger difference. You,
Yeah.
Zoe Shipper, there's people out there who really, really do this in a way that means something and does move that report rate. So
Right. Well,
that's my
because I
thought.
think it also it like changes the culture and it changes how people it changes fundamentally how people perceive reality and like how people perceive what's acceptable or not. So that's always been like and I think but I also think what you do is so important as well because like money like they go hand in hand because like people need money to be I was talking to someone yesterday, a whistleblower, and it's like to be mentally stable after you've been through something like that, you need money.
Yeah.
So like to get people money is really important, but also that's on like a super, super micro level for that person. Then when you bring it out into the public, it's just like you're bending and shaping the reality of what people understand and like what enters their consciousness. And that's super powerful.
Yeah. So I think what we do matters. And listen, the money matters, gives you runway to heal, but it
Yeah.
also provides like a capitalist underpinning for the
Hmm.
change. And back in like 2015, I was at a firm and we had this slogan that was testing really well. It was like, hey, we monetize hate. And it was really, really popular in testing. And the other partners in the firm are like, yo, if you run with that, we are going to departner you. And like, that's
Mm,
disgusting. That's terrible. And I was like, hey, I don't know if you noticed, but like the people, the audience that we're seeking, like our demo loves it. Like we
right.
done the testing. It's great. They love it. And they were like, no, no, no. And I was like, this I knew at that point I was like, I gotta get out of here because these guys don't get it. But we're able to put money in the hands of people making the change, the people who fight, people like you who share the stories.
Right.
There's so many, the investigators, right? There's people who kind of, there's PIs who are just more and more only working in this field.
Mm,
And that's important. There's publicists like you who only work
yeah,
in this field now. None of those industries could pop up without us to fund it. We make the money. And we're able to then say, okay, so like we can put these resources in the field, we can get these vendors, we can, and it becomes more than just a firm and a person standing
totally.
and fighting. It's not just a plaintiff alone anymore. It's a plaintiff, and she has her publicist and her therapist and her mental health professionals as a team, and her PI who's gonna dig around, and her
Yeah,
legal in it. And it's, you're not alone. You're an active
totally.
combatant on equal footing, and that matters, I think.
And it's a total ecosystem of support for people, and then gets,
Yeah,
yeah,
that
I
did
think,
not exist. Did not exist in the 90s. Did not. I mean, these laws have been around since the 70s.
right.
This ecosystem did not exist in the 90s, did not exist in the early aughts. It just started to exist in the late aughts. And now it's something that's meaningful, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, people just didn't have, they just stayed silent, and like to the detriment of their like physical health and like future
Yeah.
trajectory of their lives and families. And yeah, it is nice to see that there are like people who are tackling all sides of the problem, and that people also feel less alone, because I think it was so, we talked about this a few times ago, but like that when you're so isolated, both in a workplace but also outside of your life, it's like you don't have anyone to turn to, and then that's when you really start to spiral. And then people can continue, like the fact that you are like that you were stalking a serial sexual harasser by having people look at his LinkedIn and he's sweating, like that's kind of amazing. I love the guerrilla style of it.
And I think the underpin, because there's somebody who was on the channel recently who's like, oh, you're gross, you're working in a broken system and everything. I'm like, yeah, I'm a gross guy, but like, not for nothing, I can come to the average plaintiff, the average victim, I hate the word victim, but, and say, hey, you don't have the money to do this. I do. I've got 100 grand here that I can plug into your claim and invest in you, and we can get the public, the best, the Aries of the world. We can get the mental health team. We can get
Yeah.
the PI. We can get the forensic IT. We can do everything. We can back you to the end. And yeah, sure, if I make you money, I'm taking a huge percentage of that, and that's going to feel real bad. But the other option is nobody invests 100 grand in your case, and you're alone.
Yeah.
And I think that's a compelling offer. And like, there's always going to be people like, Vince, you're gross. What you do, you're making money off people's tragedies. And I'm like, okay, yeah, but they would make nothing without me, or
Yeah.
less, right? So
Yeah.
I don't feel bad about it. And it does allow these services to exist because there's no other way to turn these into resources, cash, you
Totally.
know?
Totally. Yeah. And like we can't just exist on like goodwill and like our kind hearts. Like it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Um, so I completely agree. Do you want to talk about, there's so many stories about how, so there's one about how the EEOC, the new head of the EEOC has been asked to identify anti-American discrimination.
I might
Um,
surprise you on this one. I definitely want to talk about it.
yeah, and there's a lot of stuff about reverse racism, and I'm interested in hearing your thoughts, because I'm sure it does. Like, look, I think the whole like the white men are suffering, like was always a way to attract the like working class vote of people who definitely have suffered, and had been ignored by the Democrats. But I think, yeah, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that in like corporate America, and whether, yeah, I want to be surprised. I'm sure there's a lot of nuance.
So let's separate them out first. The anti-American bias is its own thing, and that has been an issue for a long time. Not in the way that the Trump administration means it, not in this pitch to the working class. That's not what we're talking about here. If you have like a French bank doing business in New York and you sue them, they will say, "Oh, the American tax." And we're like, "Well, okay, you can call it a tax if you want, but like you are very clearly paying French nationals 3x what you're paying everyone else."
Right.
And that's national origin discrimination. They will say, "Well, of course, they're French. We're a French bank." And it's like, okay, that's fine. You can do that in France, but maybe, I don't know. I'm not an attorney in France, but you can't do that here.
Yeah.
And they'll just say like, ugh, how much? It's just like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you just keep hitting those banks over and over and over again. And listen, I lived in Japan. If you bring a national origin discrimination claim in Japan saying like, oh, they favor Japanese nationals over me, the judge will say, well, sure, you're not Japanese. And that is the law of the land. Yes, you are correct. We do favor them over you. So it's just different here. That has been the law for a long time. That has made
Right.
our, let me say, it's made our firm millions of dollars because there's many institutions that come and want to do business in the United States and refuse to accept that. There's Singaporean banks. There's a lot of very, very large institutions that just say to
Right.
themselves, these Americans are lazy, and we are overwhelmingly,
Yeah.
but their take is like, hey, we want our people, and they cut checks for that. So do I think it's wild if the EEOC addresses that? I don't. I think those claims have been existent for a long
Interesting.
time, and I think that most people don't address them, but they've done well for us. So if that's what they
Does that
mean,
also, yeah. Does
I'm
that
all
also
for it.
factor in with like the H-1B visa hiring spree?
Yeah. And that's a notable thing. So you're supposed to show for the H-1B visa, hey, we can't hire someone who does this within the bounds of the United States. We can't find the people. But there's a lot of unemployed coders in the country right now, computer science people. You don't need to go get a full contingent of people from India under H-1B. The reason they do that is because they work cheaper and they work scared, because if you cancel their
Right.
visa, their life falls apart. So it lets you get this class of super talented workers under your thumb, which you
Yeah.
might not be able to do with a US based crew. And I think that's an anti-American bias as well. They're choosing to go with the H-1B program, and this is why Elon and the tech cronies who showed up to the inauguration were so excited about H-1B, and why the Steve
Mhm.
Bannons of the world were so not, and why the progressives of the world, the Bernies of the world, are like, hey, this is like close to a slave class. Like you're importing
Yeah.
near slave labor who like lives in fear of you. It's not slavery. I'm not going to make that. It's very different, but like there's a lot of
Yeah.
leverage over these people. It's a lot. It's very scary. It's gross what they do. And it's, I think, one of the people, listen, Elon Musk, bad guy in a variety of ways. This might be the worst thing he does. Like,
Hmm.
I, I don't know.
No, definitely. I mean, because they just don't, they literally cannot speak up because
Yeah.
they're so grateful just to have the visa and to like have employment and to not be deported. So, but it'll be interesting to see like the MAGA people are so America first. And like so if Musk really pushes, if it's revealed how many non-Americans he actually hires at his companies and the fact that our taxpayer dollars are funding contracts for all of his companies,
Yeah.
like I wonder if that would actually inflame people.
I don't know. If you see Bernie Sanders and Steve Bannon agree on something,
Yeah.
stop where you are and have a think about it. What is going on? Right. Like that, at that point, you gotta be like, hold on, wait, hold on.
Yeah.
What is happening here? And I think it's meaningful.
Yeah. Steve Bannon has said some interesting stuff where he hates the tech oligarchs. He's like, they are
Yeah.
creepy. Like, he comes at it from this weird lens. Like, he believes in, like, he's like, he believes in traditional religion. That's not a weird lens, but he's like, like his point is the guys believe in this strange, what is the word, transcendentalist philosophy, where like they want to upload their brains to like the ether and they want immortality. And Steve Bannon is like, religiously it's immoral to want immortality. So he thinks that like they're completely like disturbed. So I agree with him on that, that they're disturbed. I mean, the whole immortal life, and like I honestly think that they can't imagine dying. These guys, they can't imagine not being the center of the universe because of their narcissism. So of course they can't imagine dying, or like not being able to prolong their consciousness in some way.
Yeah. My little sister will say sometimes, she's like, hey, I don't think that guy's gotten hit in the last couple of years. And you're just like, and you think you look at the tech oligarchs and it's like, I don't think they've been hit in the last couple of years. Like they just don't really like remember what it's like to be the human condition of somebody just
Yeah.
like, and
Yeah.
it gets you to make strange patterns in your brain, I think, to live like that, where everybody's protecting you and doing your bidding. It's a disease of sorts.
Totally. Totally agree.